Welcome to Blessed Be the Breakdown, the podcast where I go over the Testaments episode by episode. Today, we are going over episode 7, Commitment. Let's get into it. I want to start first and foremost with Rita is back. I was not expecting this at all. I was completely shocked and surprised, but I was so happy to see Rita back and that she's thriving and now in Canada. So I guess after everything that happened in The Handmaid's Tale, she made her way back to Canada. This is a very Daisy-heavy episode. We see Daisy back in the diner still waiting. It looks like, late at night. And eventually she's kicked out of the diner and we see the waiter is actually a part of Mayday. And that waiter is tasked with taking Daisy to meet Rita. And that's how Rita gets introduced. It is at Rita's that Daisy finds out that they're planning to send her to Colombia so that way she's safe because apparently Canada is no longer safe for her. But Daisy is not having it. She does not want anything to do with running away. Rita and the waiter, whose name I'm forgetting right now, but they're kind of just standing there like, not knowing what to do because she's now like, Daisy's like, I want to speak to June. Like, I don't want to run. So they do come up with, I guess June has been wanting to try and smuggle somebody into Canada, specifically this age, to try and, my guess is, get to Hannah, which is exactly what's going to happen as we're seeing right now because Daisy is literally living and hanging out with Agnes or Hannah every day. So I thought that was very convenient and an interesting way that they put that in there. It's kind of like, oh, wait, June wants somebody to go in there. That's how they transitioned that story, which is totally fine. Now, during the conversation between the waiter and Rita, Daisy overhears the waiter lady saying that June has a horse in the race, which is why she was trying to get somebody of that age into Gilead. Later on, we see Daisy asking Rita about that horse. And that horse, as we know, is Agnes or Hannah, June's daughter. So Rita ends up telling Daisy about June having a daughter in there. But she doesn't say the name, so Daisy is unaware of who June's daughter actually is. We also finally get some background on Daisy's birth parents, and it's confirmed that they are no longer alive. So we still don't know who they were, but we're getting little bits and pieces here and there. Another thing I wanted to touch on with Daisy is her name in the book versus the show. So in the book, Baby Nicole is Daisy, and then when Daisy goes to Gilead, she takes on a new name, which is Jade. But in the show, her real name is Marguerite, which I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Her nickname is Daisy, and they just end up keeping her nickname as she transitions into Gilead. Along with the name Daisy and the new passport and everything, she gets a whole new backstory that she has to remember, and we see Rita really quizzing her on all of this. Really hammering in who everybody is, the commanders and everything, so that way she is prepared when she goes into Gilead. In the book, when it comes to training, Daisy is actually more trained, both physically and just the same way Rita's training her in the show. But she's actually trained by Ada, physically trained by Garth, and some other people that actually help transition her to be more prepared and to be able to defend herself in Gilead. So that's something that kind of differs from the book because in the show, Daisy's literally like, are you going to teach me something like physical that I can protect myself? And Rita's like, nah, you don't need that. We're just going to learn about, your background and basically things you need to know to survive, not having to do with like physical altercations. Just in case you haven't seen my other episodes, just a reminder that in the book, Garth is actually outside and lives in Canada. He is not a guard in Gilead. So they kind of swapped him in the show. So now he is actually in Gilead and a guard, whereas in the book, he was Mayday living in Canada. In the book, since we're on the topic of Garth, he actually pretends to be her like abusive boyfriend on the street. And they're like living on the streets, and that's how they kind of get she kind of gets introduced to the Pearl Girls. Whereas in the show, she's just there by herself and eventually, ends up going with them to their hotel room. And we all saw what happened. One thing I wanted to touch on is, we all know Gilead is very cult-like and just a horrible place to be. But that hug that they gave her, I was like, whoa, okay, like this is very much cult vibes right here. It was just such a strange thing to do. She was just surrounded by all of them. I will say the book version of Daisy seems way more prepared to go into Gilead Granted, we haven't got all of the show's version of Daisy's background yet, I don't think. I'm sure we're going to get more of that because that scene with June and her is going to come in at some point, which is, I'm guessing, right before she actually goes into Gilead. So we'll be getting more flashbacks of Daisy. But so far, what we've seen from her preparation from the show has not seemed to be much at all, like other than just getting to know, like I said, the background of Gilead and who she's going to be around, commanders, and her backstory. I really think they probably could have added the aspect of the physical preparation just in case she was put into some situation where she needs to try and get out. But I also see why they probably didn't, because if you send a teenager in there who knows how to fight, teenagers are already reactive, and if put into a situation, that could probably get her in more trouble. So I can kind of see why they wouldn't want her to learn that physical aspect in the show, kind of go along with the whole teenage thing more. So that kind of makes sense too. They did kind of keep it the same with the tattoo though, because both in the show and in the book, they give Daisy this tattoo so that way she fits in more as a panhandler. And in the show, we literally heard Rita say something along the lines of, when have you not seen a panhandler with a tattoo? So I like that they kept that in there too. It just kind of adds a little touches here and there to keep some similarities between the book and the show. Now I wanted to transition back to Gilead girls here. So we have Agnes, who has found out her 3 matches. Becca has found out her 3 matches. And we find out what everybody, I'm sure, pretty much thought, I thought, was that Becca was going to be matched with Garth. Now, when Agnes found out, she didn't really show that she was hurt, but she clearly was, right? Because when we see them go out in the hall after Becca runs off because she clearly feels bad, Agnes is trying to, like, hey, it's not your fault. Like, you don't get to pick, like, we don't get to pick. But then Agnes tells Becca, don't marry him. Becca's like, hey, look, I don't get to choose. Like, I don't want to marry anybody. Becca is, once again, we've seen her throughout this, the past 2 episodes especially. Becca's just done. She doesn't want to do any of it. She clearly says, I'd rather jump off a cliff or something along the lines of that. I did not like that Agnes told Becca not to marry Garth, though, because, like, if that was my friend, granted they are teenagers, frontal lobes are not developed yet, but if that was my friend, I would think I'd want her to marry the better choice, even if it was somebody that I liked, because we have no choice. So that kind of was like, Agnes, maybe don't do that, okay? Let's like think of our friend for a second here. That being said, though, I think Becca will end up with Garth. I think Agnes finding out that Becca got matched with Garth kind of like definitely like I said, it's bothering her a little bit. So when she meets with Commander Weston, she brings up his ex-wife, who apparently died during childbirth. So that was like a sore subject for him. Paula gets pissed off, and Commander Weston's basically like, I gotta leave. But that apparently didn't stop him from still wanting to take Agnes as his wife, because we find out later that he still wants her. I did want to touch on the comment that Paula made. I'll try and put it on the screen because I can't remember what she said verbatim, but it was something along the lines of breaking in a horse, or like men liking to break in horses or something. I don't know, pertaining to like him wanting a challenge when it came to Agnes, and I just thought that was so disgusting and gross, and she is just such a bee. I cannot stand her. Now, when it comes to matches, I did want to touch on Shu's comment that she made when Agnes says that she's gonna miss Rosa once she's like off and married, and Shu's basically like, well, maybe Paula will give her to you as a gift. And things like this really just like snap you out of like, okay, you're kind of like in this teenage like show world for a minute, and then oh my god, you're like, well, crap, damn, like the way they think is just so different, and like making comments like that, it's just crazy. I mean, it's the world they've been brought up in and the world they live in, so that's obviously, they're used to it, but from an outside perspective, hearing that, it's just like, that is crazy. That's a crazy thing to say, especially for a teenager. Now, not only do we get Daisy's backstory, but we also get her in Gilead being scared once again. And it seems like every episode she's inching closer to being caught, because we see the eyes coming into the school and rounding up all the Pearl girls for interviews, because the radio on the table. So it looks like they found the radio that Daisy has been using. And I think as soon as Daisy goes in to get interviewed, that radio just like sends like a shiver down her spine, because she's like, oh shit, like I am very close to being caught. But from the beginning, when we saw her put the radio into her, like, I don't know what you call it, the person next to her's bed, I was like, oh, that poor girl's gonna go down for that radio. And sure enough, she did. We saw that. Her bunkmate, I'll call her, got taken away. I did want to touch on Vidala's face though when this happens. Like, she clearly, like, she turns her face and kind of like doesn't want to see it. So I think there's some redemption still in Vidala, and she'll probably kind of maybe take the path that, you know, Aunt Lydia does, where she kind of swerves and becomes nicer. Or she could take the other path Aunt Lydia took and finally just snap and be a full-on bee. Now, with everything going on with Daisy, there came this point in this episode where Daisy was clearly frightened. Agnes goes, tries to comfort her, says the eyes are like trying to keep them safe, blah, 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 blah. But Agnes ends up inviting Daisy over to her house. We get the moment in Agnes's room where her and Daisy are talking. Agnes shows Daisy this like collection of knickknacks, essentially, that she's been collecting over the years from the previous world. One of those items being a crack pipe. And, you know, Daisy kind of like starts to get to the point where she's saying that at first. And then she realizes that she doesn't want to break Agnes's view of this thing that she made up. Because that crack pipe, she said, was, I can't remember once again the exact verbiage, but she says something along the lines of, she likes to believe that this has to do with love or something. And so Daisy's like, I cannot crush this girl's world. So she doesn't tell her the truth. But Agnes catches on and kind of calls her on her bullshit. But during this moment in the room, we really see like the two different worlds they come from, and it's showing really prevalent, you know. And I think from an outside perspective, sometimes it's kind of hard to remember that they are coming from two different worlds, because ultimately it's a show. So the little moments like this really kind of snap us back into that. Oh yeah, you know, they're from different places. Gilead versus Canada. Different freedoms, different upbringings, different exposures. We get a moment with Agnes and Garth. I think it's directly after the Commander Weston stuff happened. She kind of goes outside, catches Garth smoking a cigarette, but Garth walks off and leaves the cigarette there. She picks it up and like almost tries to smoke it, and Garth walks up and kind of tells her something. This is kind of reminiscent to me too of when June catches Nick smoking and they kind of have a conversation, or being flirty, blah, blah, blah. They're kind of doing the same thing here, because Agnes asks Garth if he thinks she has a personality. And then they kind of have this like flirty conversation that, you know, that Agnes is really hurting by not being matched with Garth. Towards the end of the episode though, we see that Agnes actually kept the cigarette and put it in her little trinket thing, which I thought was like cute, but like at the same time, it's like that bag has to smell like cigarettes. If you've ever had like a cigarette that was burnt out, it's just gonna smell that poor little bag up, which is such a random thing to think about, but that's just what I thought about when I saw that. One more thing, last thing I'm going to touch on this episode is Vidala again, when the eyes are coming into the school, and she is kind of like, well, I need to talk to Aunt Lydia first, right? So I wonder like if she knows something, like if she's trying to hide something as well, or what's kind of going on with that, because I feel like there's going to be more to that part of the story, because like I said, ever since we saw the scene between Aunt Lydia and Vidala in the stadium, I feel like we're going to get a lot more of Vidala and see a lot more of her character development going forward. And I think these little looks and these little things she's saying are really hinting towards something else. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see. I would really like to thank you all for watching, listening, and, you know, just talking to me on social media. It's been such a fun thing to have this podcast, and I love doing it. I'm actually really shocked with how much I'm liking this show, because I did not expect to like it as much as I do. I know a lot of people actually don't like it, which is kind of crazy to me, but everybody has their own opinions. But I'll see you next week for episode 8. As always, blessed be the fight.